This week on Filthy Hope.
At its heart, it takes seriously a key doctrinal truth that I don't think we talk about much, is the fact that, yes, Jesus was God, but Jesus was also human.
Oh, I say it all the time, but I never unpack it.
We love to
His
talk
humanity.
about he was both, but really in practice, we kind of prefer Jesus as
Miracle
being
maker.
Miracle maker, God,
Waymaker.
walking on water,
Yeah,
all of those
we love
things.
that one.
We don't like to think about what it actually means to be equally as human.
Yeah, that's right.
This podcast is a Uniting Heart and Soul production and was recorded on land that was stolen nearly 250 years ago. On this particular episode, we recorded on the land occupied by the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation. We pay our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and we acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. At Filthy Hope, we humbly contribute to the ancient and ongoing traditions of storytelling when we share stories on this podcast.
G'day and welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. If it's your first time here on this podcast, we spend time in the grey spaces where Jesus, life and culture intersect. I'm your host, Pastor Jonty, and joining me is my co-host, Rev Ness.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm loving the new set.
It's good, right? It's comfy.
Oh, it's such a good vibe. I feel like I've got to be careful. I'll have to watch my language and my behaviour because I feel really relaxed. I'm not like at a desk.
Yeah.
So it feels like I could be just at home with a glass of Pinot.
That's right.
A bit of cheese.
Nothing stopping us from doing that
We
here.
could do that.
Yeah, so if you're listening, you can't see where we're sitting at the moment. You've got to check out the YouTube.
It's lovely.
It's very nice, I will say.
Beautiful. Feels nice.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about, this is one of our little handful of Easter or Lent themed episodes in the lead up to Holy Week and Easter and Good Friday. We put out a little question on our Instagram page a while back asking people to send in some of their favourite movies or TV shows about Jesus, because that's largely what we're doing in this little run of episodes. And shout out to James. He actually sent in two answers to this question, one of which was the TV show Chosen. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I have.
I've never seen it, but so many people have mentioned it to me, and
I'm using a lot of the material in church on Sundays.
Yeah.
I love it because just to punctuate what I'm talking about, they give beautiful graphics and it's really sensitively done and it just looks really real, like how I'd imagine it to be. And having been in Jerusalem just last year, it kind of, to me, now it comes alive and looks really just how I'd imagine. So I like The Chosen. Yeah. Certainly the pieces that I have seen.
Yeah. Something I haven't actually seen that one, so I'll have to get onto it. And he also mentioned The Passion of the Christ, which we will talk about
Bum, bum, bum.
at a later point. On a later episode, we're going to talk all about that movie because I have lots of thoughts on that one as well.
We'd preface that with 3 hours of torture. And that's not just for the viewer, it's for Jesus,
yeah,
right?
and he says it's for the sheer reason that it doesn't sugarcoat anything.
Oh, it's heavy.
I have thoughts about a lot of that stuff, which I'll leave until we talk about that movie in depth, because I think there are some issues that I have with it. But
I have lots of issues with it, and one of it's having to rewatch it again in preparation for our next pod on that. And I started that, and I had to stop it because it's so much blood and so much death, and I had to be kind of in a safe place to want to engage with that because I would just sit and cry for a length of time. You've got to kind of give yourself up to fully engage in that. You've got to give over the emotion, I think, to fully get into that movie. But like you said, we'll do that one next time.
That was the first. I watched The Passion of the Christ for the first time a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
So I've never actually seen it.
Why is that? Why did you miss that when were you too young? When that
it came out in 2004, so I was 6.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I definitely didn't see it when it came out.
Right.
But it's just, because I know what it is, I always knew what it was. It was a movie that was essentially about the suffering and pain of Jesus.
Yeah.
It just never stuck out to me as like, I really need to watch that. That sounds like an enjoyable 2.5 hours.
Oh.
And spoilers for that episode, largely I kind of still feel that way about it. I'm not entirely sure what we're meant to get out of it other than look how much pain Jesus is in.
Yeah.
But we'll dive into that on a future episode. So thanks for suggesting that one, James. We will.
I think it's just I'll just say this is my immediate thought on that is it's just a massive punctuation, full stop. He suffered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? He suffered. There's no denying the suffering.
Yeah.
And it's graphically portrayed. Thank you, Mel.
Yeah. with added
matter.
anti-Semitism, which is
always
fun. Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, nice.
So we'll dive into that on a future episode. Today, though, we're talking about probably an equally as controversial
Jonty.
portrayal of Jesus. We are talking about Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ, which came out in 1988. It was written by Paul Schrader, who we've actually spoken about before on this show when we talked about First Reformed, which is another great film that takes faith seriously, I think, and is based on a novel.
Yeah.
Not based on any of the Gospels. It's based on a novel whose name, written by a guy who we were trying to figure out how to pronounce his last name. Yep.
Kazantzakis. How do you say it? You've got a better go at it.
Kozankakis,
yeah,
maybe?
I think that's a good one. Kozankakis.
Well, the name will be up on the screen.
Yeah. Nico. I'm just calling him Nico.
Let's call him Nico. That's a bit easier.
But I think it's important because I had a little Google fossick to understand where Nico is coming from. He was born in the very late 1800s, which I thought was interesting.
1880 something.
Yeah, for this movie. He wrote this novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, in 1955, but it was translated in 1960. He died in 57, so he never actually got to see this movie in the 80s become a thing or even have it translated into English.
Yeah.
He never even saw that part. He was a poet, philosopher, and a great Greek writer who is revered. So, impressive gentleman. Yeah.
And one of many works of his that are thought of as classics in Greek literature.
Yeah, absolutely. He got excommunicated at the point of writing this, and the Greek Orthodox Church had a little bit of a meltdown, as you will understand why, potentially, and then reinstated. And he struggled with Greek Orthodoxy. Yeah, dabbled a little bit in Buddhism at a time, and then, but never ever said that he was an atheist. Always came back to his Christian values. Yeah, so it's interesting understanding his hermeneutic, given the movie is really confronting.
Yes, because given that it's based on a novel and not one of the four Gospels, it very openly differs from the Gospel narratives in some really important and distinctive ways. So I will say it's important to remember when watching this film and when talking about it that it is openly a fictionalized retelling of the life and death of Jesus. And
it scrolls up on the screen actually at the very first start, doesn't it? Scrolls up saying this is not from it's not an account of one of the four Gospels, so don't think it is. It's just fictitious and knock yourselves out as you watch this. Yeah. I read that, but I still was looking for the bits that I knew to be biblical fact, and it did my entire head in. I was texting you through it.
Yeah, you were.
I can't even repeat the things that I was thinking and saying as I texted you, brother.
Yeah.
But the confusion that I suffered.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah. So to maybe, obviously we're going to be spoiling this movie, so you haven't seen it and you want to see it unspoiled.
Tune out,
pause the pod, go and watch the movie and come back if you want to. But The Last Temptation of Christ is a fictionalized retelling of the life of Jesus. That my way of summarizing it is that it's an interrogation or a meditation on the humanity of Jesus.
Yes.
When we talk about Emmanuel, God with us, we think of and we understand doctrinally as Christ being fully human and fully God, as something that doesn't actually make sense to us as human beings. But it's that paradox that is at the heart of the miracle that is Jesus Christ. He was fully human and fully God. So this is a film that thinks about and takes seriously the idea that Jesus was actually fully human.
It's something I've never stopped to think about.
Yeah, it's
I actually
interesting.
don't want him to be fully human. I've realised. I'm happy.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't want him to be. I don't want him to make mistakes, and I did not want to see him doing some of the things he was doing in this movie. That did my head in.
Yeah, so
I don't want to see him tempted.
No.
I don't want the desires of the flesh outplayed in this God that I hold as miraculous and perfect in all things. I don't like the idea of him being not what I think.
Yeah, no, it's definitely challenging.
Did you feel that way?
Oh, 100%. The first time I
thank
saw it,
you.
I was watching it thinking like, are you allowed to do this?
Yes.
So to as a quick reminder for people that either aren't going to see the movie or have seen it already, it essentially a fictionalized retelling of the life of Jesus that culminates in him being crucified, as is in all of the Gospels, in our understanding of the Passion narrative, at which point he is taunted by, one interpretation would be the devil or an evil spirit that basically says, if you are Jesus, get down. Like, you can end this. You don't have to follow through with getting crucified. You could show your power to everyone and end this. And so he does. He gets down off the cross. And what follows is an extended sequence in which Jesus lives out his life and grows old and has a family. And the pivotal point, or the closing climactic moment of the movie, is when Jesus, having not died, having not been crucified, as an old man with a family, suddenly realizes what the cost of that is and has this moment of epiphany that, no, Christ has to die. And so either he literally grew to be old and then time traveled back and hops back up on the cross and he's crucified and dies, or what I think is a more reasonable reading of the film is that is a long vision that he's having on the cross, playing that out in his mind, and comes to the realization that no, this is more important than any fleshly desires that I might have. I am Christ, and this has to happen as is the plan, as was prophesied. So we cut back, and he's on the cross, and he says the famous line, "Why have you forsaken me?" And he gives up his life, and he dies, and is resurrected.
Oh, I feel so much better hearing you describe that as a potential dream sequence and not depicted as a real thing.
Despite that, we still watch Jesus do something that we have internalized as not how the story goes.
Yeah, yeah. But there's lots of that throughout the
there is
entire
lots.
movie.
From the very beginning of the film, we see that Jesus, who we know was a carpenter, or more likely, if we understand that, given the context of where he was living and his life, he was probably more like what we would understand as a stonemason. But in this film, we see him, we meet him for the first time in the film, played by the great Willem Dafoe, building crosses for the Romans.
Yeah. And being a part, that first scene where he's actually assembling a cross up at Golgotha, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And the
That's his
first
job.
scene is he's shoving the crossbar into the vertical piece, and the centurions are hammering the nail into the victim's hand, and blood just spurts all over Jesus' face. I nearly hurled at that point. I thought, please, I don't have 3 hours of this to watch. Surely, Jonty. I was like, bleh. I couldn't. It was just like, it was too much. But it was interesting that he was depicted as the crucifix maker.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. And I'm sure, again, this was a novel, I'm sure that having not read the novel, in the film it's just kind of shown that that's what he's doing. I'm sure in the novel there's more behind what he's doing there and why, and the context behind that, and maybe the reason why that it's chosen that that's Jesus' job, basically.
Isn't it interesting how I just accidentally said crucifix maker? He actually is the crucifix maker.
Yes.
In real, but not only in this movie, but even biblically, because he chose to be crucified.
Mm-hmm.
So he made that a thing. He made that happen. He made it happen.
And there's a sense of inevitability about it.
Yeah.
That's underlined by the fact that he's actually one of the pairs of hands making these things physically. He's a part of the machine that then he gives himself over to be killed.
The violence of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like being an electric chair maker.
And then getting executed by electric chair. Yeah.
Or the administer of lethal injection person. Whoever that medical person is that has to do that. It's pretty disgusting, really, isn't it? Yeah, that was confronting. And then I've written down that the next scene after seeing that was very confronting for me. And I actually realised a lot about myself in watching this movie.
That's amazing. That's why we watch movies. Can I just say, like, before you go on, I feel so strongly that the only things that, when movies illuminate things for us, it's only the things that we bring to them in the first place. Great movies act as prisms that reflect things back to us. And so hearing you say that, I'm like, yes, that's the whole point. That's amazing.
Oh, no, Jonty, because what I've realised is that I'm actually a squeaky mainstream Christian. I really am. I'm a bit
you
of
hear
a
that,
straight,
everyone?
I'm a bit of a straighty 180 down the barrel of the camera. I have realised, having watched this movie, that I am actually very centred on my theological beliefs and how the experience of Christ and the Trinity is for me, and this movie upset that for me. It like rattled my cage, like I was on the Titanic, mate. I didn't want to sink with the Titanic. I wanted some chopper to come in and lift me off that and get me the hell out of that movie, because it was just so disruptive to what I know to be, what I believe is the truth of Christ.
And isn't it so interesting? And we'll come back to this at the end, because there's a whole bunch of stuff about what happened after this movie was released.
Yes.
Even though the movie and the novel are actively telling you this isn't
I know.
a gospel, that doesn't matter.
Doesn't help.
It doesn't help.
Didn't help.
It's still confronting.
Confronted me, and I kept going, no, that's not how it was.
Yeah.
That's not how it is.
Yeah.
And then surely they're not doing it like that. And this scene particularly. So we've just watched blood splatter. Jesus is the maker of the crosses. He's hammering the crucified people and taking part of that machine, as you said. And then one of the next scenes is actually we meet Mary. We meet this prostitute character that we go on to know is Mary, and it's Barbara Hershey. She's a main character throughout this movie. And Mary, the prostitute, has this beautiful relationship with Jesus, but I hadn't thought of her as a temptress. I had never thought of her, because the Bible doesn't depict her this way. I feel really like a straighty 180 when I'm saying this. I feel a bit ignorant also, that I'd never thought of Mary being skanky or wanting to have sex with Jesus or wanting to lure him into something he didn't want to do. And this, I never thought that, never once. I just thought he has loved her because he loves the least of these. He has compassion for the broken, the lost, and that's why he loved her. But this movie paints another picture.
Yeah.
And this scene where I felt really unnerved is where she is having sex with a man, and you could see through the curtains that that's exactly what's going on. And all these men are outside watching her have sex with a man. And I'm still trying to work out what that was. Are they in a lineup? Because are they queuing up? Because that's her job, and therefore she's they're up next. And then it gets to and they're all sitting there watching this happen, like some kind of sex show. that I found really deeply disturbing because Jesus was there also watching in that scene. And then it goes to Jesus. All the men have then been and done whatever. You don't see all of them have sex with her, but you presume that that's what's happened because they're no longer there.
That's implied.
Implied, yep. And then you see she's asleep and he comes into her space.
Yep.
And he's doing care and compassion. But she tries to lure him in again.
Yep. Yep.
With touch me, be with me. And I'm going, oh, surely that didn't happen. Sure. And I know that this is a fictitious thing, but in my brain I'm having this biblical crisis.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. I'm yelling at the TV. No, he doesn't have sex with her. He wouldn't have touched her in a thigh. That didn't happen like that.
Yeah.
You know, it disturbed the crap out of me, Jonty.
Yeah. And I think in being a fictitious retelling, it gives itself some liberties to... It's putting Jesus in situations where he is tempted, and it's using the established characters in the narrative to do so. And so 100% it is confronting and weird.
Isn't it? Yeah.
To see that.
Did you see how my body was just then?
You were all tense. Yeah.
My hands were clenched. Yeah. My jaws started to ache and I feel like my whole body is in like fight or flight.
Yeah.
Just thinking about that.
Yeah. And
it's that disturbing.
The thing that the movie does is it treads a line between taking seriously the fact that if Jesus was human as well as God, then Jesus would have been tempted. And we read in Scripture, there's that whole chapter where he's in the desert with Satan and Satan tempts him.
Yeah.
So who's to say that he wasn't privy to other temptations in his human form?
He would have been.
He would have been.
But we don't read it in the red writing.
Probably, unless you really, really go looking for some things and read into the way things are described. But what the movie does is tread the line between showing that, which we can understand theologically as a part of becoming human. Jesus was tempted by human things.
Yeah.
But it never tips over until towards the end, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
It never tips over into depicting Jesus as giving into those temptations and sinning. Because crucially, and why I think Martin Scorsese is a great filmmaker and a great someone who makes great art about faith.
Yeah.
He understands, I think, something that and probably is core to the Christian faith and the understanding of Christ, is that Christ did not sin. Yeah. That is the part of the whole deal about Christ being crucified and resurrected, is that he didn't sin.
Blameless.
And so he was blameless, which is the whole point of it all.
Yeah.
And so, but that's why it's really confronting to see it get close.
I've got to tell you the next bit though.
Yeah, please.
I'm still in the same scene, right?
Yeah.
So she takes Jesus' hand and she places it on her bare flesh part of her body, intimate part of her body, it seemed to look like to me. And I'm in my brain, I'm screaming at the TV going, don't you tempt my Jesus? As honestly, I'm a bit cray-cray about this thing. I'm straighty 180, I've realised. And then as soon as I've said that, it's looking like he's going to give in to the temptation. I think we might have seen a depiction of a snake.
Yep.
The snake pops up a fair bit and I got, oh, here we go. He's going down. Oh, I'm going to have to turn this off and ring Jonty and say, I can't watch this shit. Sorry, Jonty. And then the next thing, Jesus, just when I think he's going to give in to this temptation, because that's the name of the movie, he doesn't, and he rejects her ever so gently. And then I find about myself, I get then the shits with Jesus for rejecting her, and I'm watching her pain as she rejects him.
Wow.
And then I switch. This is why I was so disturbed by the movie.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh no, poor Mary. Mary loves him. I think she just didn't want to have sex with him. She just had sex with a dozen. There's no way any woman in the world wants to do that. Just saying. Maybe there are some women that want to do that, but I find that one hard to believe. And then there's no way that she would be wanting that I was thinking. And then he rejects her and then I'm sad. My emotions went from pillar to post in that one scene. And then I had this huge attachment to her and the shame that she felt and all the range of emotions that she would have felt as a rejected woman. It was quite a powerful scene now I think about it. Pissed me off at the time because I felt so confused.
Yeah. This is like touching on something that we're going to talk about in another episode as well, around how maybe fragile's not the right word, but as Christians we can sometimes be, like you've described, and this isn't a bad thing, it's just the nature of being
Fragile's
a person of
a good
faith,
word.
is when something threatens how we feel about it, especially when it comes to art. I actually think being uncomfortable can be good. Because just hearing you take me through that experience, that stretched you in two different directions within the space of about 5 minutes.
Yes,
right?
it did.
And I think that's wonderful, because if our faith is so fragile that a film can actually shake our faith and challenge the foundations of our Christian faith, then this might sound that I'm calling people out, but I'm not trying to. But my conviction is then probably that faith wasn't super strong to start with if a film can shake it. And so what I actually think in replacing that idea is films like this, in taking people on a journey like the one that you just described, actually stretch our faith and get us to think about things in different ways that are outside of the beaten track that we just operate in most of the time.
Or I'd never thought about it this way. I'd never stopped to consider another version.
Yeah.
Ever. I just read the red writing. I faithfully believe with hope what I'm reading, and I had never thought outside what I have read.
And to clarify, it's not pushing us into places that aren't biblical. It's actually taking things that are biblical, in this case, the humanity of Christ, and challenging us to think about that in ways that we may not. Like you said at the beginning, we don't often like to think about Jesus as human because Jesus was God.
Yes. But how many times do I stand up and say when I'm talking about the Trinity that Jesus was, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus was fully human.
Yeah. And fully God.
Fully God.
Wrap your head around that.
Time. Yep. Sucked in. Good luck with that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But so yes, it was... I broke this down scene by scene. I could bore you to tears with my upset.
Well, hit me with a couple more. What were the major things? Because this is good as well to go through some of the challenging moments in this movie.
I think I really liked the stone throwing scene, and they used the same Mary in the stone throwing scene, and I had not thought that it was actually the same Mary that they were throwing stones at biblically. Well, remember, this is fiction, but it was interesting choice to use her. And watching the language that he uses, Jesus actually said words like, in the Bible it says, don't, here are some stones, guys, you cast the first stone if you have no sin. And they were still chucking stones. And then Jesus reveals, and which we don't read it in the Bible, but this is something I loved about this version, because I've wondered if Jesus doesn't say it in the Bible, but I'd always hoped that it was implied that Jesus did actually point the finger at these men and say, as they're lifting the stone to throw at Mary, well, you were there. I saw you in the lineup. I saw you shagging her. What about you, mate? You're having sex with Mrs. Shepherd over there. And what about you, Peter? You bonking so-and-so in the caravan over there. And what about you behind the donkey on the last Tuesday? And Jesus in this movie does exactly that.
Calls them all out.
Calls it out.
Yeah.
I kind of sat there going, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, brother, bring that on. I was on a roller coaster, Jonty. Yeah. And so that for me was a great thing, because I thought, I reckon he did do that. Yeah. was happy to see that.
Yeah.
I loved it. It felt like victory.
It falls in line with some of the other stories we do read in Scripture where Jesus. I mean, the immediate one that jumps to mind is when he flips the tables in the temple.
Oh, yes.
But when he gets really direct with people, especially he often does it with the Pharisees, and he actually just he gets sick. I sometimes read it as he's getting a little bit sick of being vague and talking in story and answering questions with questions, and he finally just goes, you know what? I'm going to call this out right now as I see it.
Right.
And he does that a couple of times in Scripture, and
Yes.
this stands out to me as another example of that.
Correct. But in Scripture, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think he bends down and writes in the dirt.
Yeah.
But I
He
don't
just starts
start doodling in the dirt.
Yeah.
It might have been arrows or emojis pointing to certain people. Do you know what I mean? Who
Could have
knows
been,
what he was doing? But I don't think that we read that he actually calls out people's sin.
Not in this.
No.
Instance.
And I something about my own fleshy self and my own sinful nature, I do like the fact that this Jesus depiction called out the sin, because how many times have you had in your own life some unjust thing happen to you, but as a Christian, it's not appropriate to call it out because that just is not a good thing to do. You know, nerny never really floats it in the church.
Yeah. Show grace.
Yeah, we're meant to be gracious and humble and all of that.
Yeah.
But my fleshy self kind of wants to go, see, I told you. Yeah, look what they did. Look what she said. Look
Call
what he
it
did.
out. Yeah.
Call that stuff out.
Yeah.
You know? So I liked this depiction. That got like 10 points for me.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'm loving
Sweet.
Jesus. I'm loving William in that moment.
Yeah.
Many others I'm not, but that was definitely one. Yeah.
Are there any others that stick out to you? Because spoiler alert, you didn't actually get the whole way through, and I'll
because I couldn't.
yeah, and we will go through what then happens after that point, because that's, I think, is fascinating. But before we get to that point, were there any others that stuck out to you?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got pages of them, but it was the washing of Mary's feet, and so Jesus washes feet. Jesus has his feet washed. There's lots of feet washing. I'm a deacon. I love the feet washing thing. It's lovely. And I'm going, oh, look, he's washing Mary's feet, but he's washing blood off Mary's feet. That never occurred to me that after her stoning that she would have been bleeding. Or was the bleeding a hemorrhaging? Was it in reference to a hemorrhaging than a healing? It really disturbed me. I think being a woman and having had a period for so many years, blood like that is an ick for many women. It's something that we just live with and know about. But seeing the blood on her feet just made me feel deeply disturbed that he would be the one to wash it off. Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is it
Why
just
am I
to
disturbed?
do? Yeah, like is it to do with like you say, like just the connotations of the blood, or is it?
Yeah, I felt like because she didn't look like she was injured or have blood running out of her arm or a thigh. To me, this is the character on the screen. It did look like to me a depiction or a pointing of menstrual blood, and so to me, for me, it felt. When I watched that, I was just, I want to say ick, but it wasn't ick moment. It was kind of, the depth of his love for her to do that for her,
It's a real servant.
to clean her up.
Yeah, it's a real servant.
Oh
thing
my
to do,
gosh,
isn't it?
deep. Like,
Because not only is it
It's
like you're
another
washing
level.
the feet, but it's like hygiene and all sorts of things. Like it's a really
the whole Jewish
all
female
all that stuff
menstruating.
layered on top of each other.
Yeah, it's like heavy going. I was kind of stopped in my tracks when I watched that bit and went, it just, I suppose a whole lot of theology ripped through my brain in that moment.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting watching it? I kept trying to align it to the Bible, even though the very first credits say, this isn't from the Gospels. My brain kept trying to find a connection and a link. Was this true? Did this happen? And then I was left with, but what if it did? Yeah, it may have. So I was left in that. Shit, I'd never stopped to think about that when he washed feet. I just always thought, and I've preached, dirty sandals, dirty feet, dirty road. Been to Jerusalem, it's dusty.
But can you imagine walking on a rocky path with sandals? Your feet would probably be pretty busted up.
Yeah, they could be. Yeah, exactly.
Whether or not it's literally like bleeding, but you'd have
But it was like
cuts and
congealed
bruises
blood on her. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah,
on
I do.
Tops of her feet. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Not other than it's just a extension of and a more intense depiction of the. It's not even humility. It's bordering on like it's a bit humiliating being lowered to the point of cleaning someone's feet in that way.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things in this movie, I think it's whether or not it's literal, because a lot of it, as it says right at the beginning, it's not a literal representation of the gospel. It's a illustration of, in the case of the washing of the feet, just how gross and humiliating that could have been.
Yeah.
And so therefore the importance of it.
Yeah.
Because it didn't matter to Jesus that there was blood on her feet.
You don't see him upset.
Exactly.
He doesn't look upset in the movie. I was upset.
And to me, it's almost like that, like I often say when it comes to things like the deep unfairness inherent in when we talk about grace, that's to our benefit. It's to our benefit that it doesn't matter how dirty our feet are.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus still washes them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point.
100%.
Yeah.
Very confronting to see, though.
Do you have one more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got about 9 more, but this is probably one that did my brain in, was the John the Baptist scene. Okay, so there's it's, you know how I started off by saying I feel like a straighty 180? It's all the nudity did my head in.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me, Jonty.
And we'll talk about this again with Passion of the Christ.
What is wrong with me, brother? Like, honestly.
Like, we're totally cool seeing, like, graphic violence, but as soon as it comes to nudity, no.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know why that undid me so much, but complete unbridled nudity and they're by the water and it's really Pentecostal.
Yeah.
It's a very Pentecostal by the rivers of Babylon kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And I thought, it had Hillsong overtones, nude, all got long hair. It's very Venus de Milo kind of depicted women.
Yep. That's interesting.
Did you pick up that from an art perspective? Even the body types with that Venus de Milo kind of look. And Jesus turns up, has this weird relationship with the Baptist, and in my brain I've gone, they're cousins. They love each other. They're going to really be tight little cousins like, your cousins are in your family. Oh, my gosh, no. It was not familial cousin love. It was edgy depiction, angry, quite very confronting again for me to see because it's not how I had thought the biblical narrative to be. However, there was a disclaimer at the start that says it's not based, but still my brain is trying to find that.
Yeah, you're trying to
land. I'm trying to land this story. And it's interesting. So you see them, they're penty, they've got tambourines, they're doing the thing. He's dunking them in water, scooping water on them, and then all of a sudden Jesus turns up and the first thing you see is all the women cover their private parts. Do you remember that? And I went, so like the Son of Man has turned up and they've all become aware of their shame, maybe, even though they're being baptised at the river. But they weren't covering themselves up and their private parts when everybody else was there. It's just when Jesus turns up.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting choice.
Yeah, there's a couple of I don't know. I feel like it could be like I immediately thought of Adam and Eve.
Yes, so did I.
Once they
Yeah.
sin. They realise they've sinned and they suddenly are aware
Fig
of the
leaves.
fact that they're naked.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're ashamed.
100%.
That's immediately what jumped to my head.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Whether it's also possibly, I don't know if is the implication that the practices that they're doing down at the river aren't
what they're
biblical or
meant to be doing.
scriptural or what they're meant to be doing. And so
Yeah.
they're on some level maybe aware of that. And so when Jesus shows up, they go, oh,
Whoops.
we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And because they instantly know who it is.
Yeah, they do.
Because otherwise they wouldn't bother
Yeah.
covering themselves. I don't know what that implies. Like, does that mean in this fictitious retelling that John the Baptist is taking part in
orgies,
pagan, like non-Jewish, like I don't know how you describe it, but like I don't know. And again, it's fictional, so even I'm tiptoeing around this because I'm scared to be like
made me nervous.
Say something that's non-biblical, but that's the whole point. Is it's freeing itself up to not be biblical.
Correct.
So it's exploring different things.
But it's funny how your brain tries to land it somewhere.
Yeah.
Into some kind of understanding or knowing.
Yeah.
You know, the same psychological phenomenon when you hear about a crime, like a really bad crime, and you think to yourself, how could they do that? It doesn't land in your brain. Do you know what I mean?
You try to figure it out.
Yeah. And you can't ratify it in your brain or find a place for it because it's so atrocious.
Yeah.
With this movie, that's what was happening for me a lot. I couldn't place it somewhere where I could feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I think. Probably more about me and my own shit, really.
But I also think that that's what the movie's trying to do.
Yeah.
It's not just for a Christian audience. I'd be really curious to hear if we have any listeners or people watching that maybe don't consider themselves Christian, how you find watching this movie. But I think for a Christian audience, it's not hiding from the fact that it's being a bit provocative and doing some different things.
It's provocative.
Like I think it's pretty clearly confrontational in that and knows what it's doing. And Scorsese being a Catholic,
right?
It's not like these differences are coming through by mistake.
Yeah,
like it's a very intentional choice. And so then the question is why? What's the intention and what's the desired effect of seeing the gospel told slightly differently?
Yeah.
And this is a film that caused a lot of controversy at the time. So for all the reasons that we've talked about that you've identified and how it made you feel watching, and certainly how I felt watching it, there were some bits where I'm watching it going, you can't show that. Like, is that? Even though, like we said 1,000 times, it's fiction, right? It's not trying to retell the gospel. You still watch it going like, are you allowed to do this? So at the time this came out in 1988, like so much controversy to the point where I'm just pulling up the details here. Like there was a terrorist attack essentially on a theatre that was showing the movie that was led by the integralist Catholic group. Set fire to a cinema while people were in the cinema watching the film for exactly those same reasons. The
so upset.
Blasphemy and really upset. It reminds me a lot of how when like 10 or 15 years ago the cartoon in the paper depicting Muhammad.
Yes.
A similar level of religious outrage at how Christ was being depicted.
Are we talking Charlie Hebdo?
I think so.
In France?
Yeah, that's the one. But there's so many examples of that, and it's interesting to me that a film about Jesus is what did it for particular Catholic groups.
Yeah, I got so upset.
Yeah, and Scorsese as a Catholic was then also targeted by death threats. I think I've heard him speak recently that he still gets the occasional death threat around this movie.
Wow.
Which is crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
But so, where did you get up to? I'm curious to because then we can dovetail into the ending.
They do the big desert scene. I thought that was interesting. Where, that kind of did my head in as well. And I'm watching the cobra come up, and this is what my brain does. Oh, come on! You don't have cobras in Israel. that's not a Middle Eastern snake. Do you know what I mean? It was that kind of, why does my brain even look for that kind of detail? That's just dumb. But yet we think of that snake as with the big neck as being a scary kind of tempting creature, don't we?
You look at it and you instantly think, that's the scary snake from the garden.
Don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But they're not a Middle Eastern snake, apparently. Yeah, so that does my head in. The apple tree, this apple tree appears and he bites into the apple and blood oozes out of it. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was a moment where it was like, oh, really? Now I'm really going to have to go and have a wee or a cup of tea because that has just pushed me one step too far. Yet we often talk about the garden and the tree of knowledge, and it's depicted as a fruit tree.
Yeah. And the image of Jesus biting the apple as a really provocative image of temptation.
Yeah.
That same temptation that we read about Adam and Eve.
It's like the second Adam being tempted all again and repeating the sin of the original Adam. Like that did my head in. I was theologically in tune enough to go, oh no, this has gone too far now. Sitting there and I'm getting to that point and I'm going, no, I don't know how much more I can sit through of this. It was really interesting. And the blood going everywhere. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that really hard, and I got through a Mary and Martha scene and the pulling out of the heart, his heart out of his stomach, that scene.
Lots of really provocative
graphic.
images.
Really graphic stuff that really pushed probably my own personal buttons. Lots of it. I found it very confronting. I got up to the Palm Sunday part where he's coming through and they're looking for the revolutionary, and come on, Jesus, you're going to do it. Let's fight, let's go. And he just walks away and they're left in a fight.
Yeah.
A ruckus. I was deeply, I felt quite traumatised by the movie, Jonty. Watch it in the daytime, not the night time, because you need a couple of hours to sort of debrief.
Yeah, and it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long or something from memory. And it doesn't stop there. Like it really, the thing that I think is the most provocative but also the most interesting part of the film is what happens in the final act, which as Jesus is being crucified, he's tempted. And we actually read in, I can't remember which gospel it is, someone shouts at him, like, if you are the Son of God, show us.
Yeah, save yourself.
Save yourself, jump down, save yourself. And so he's tempted, and he does.
Yeah, wow.
We watch Jesus get down off the cross, and in not just a 5-minute scene, in like a long scene, it's like half an hour, we watch Jesus live his life and grow old, have a family with Mary. It's, again, probably would have been a button too many for you, but we see Mary and Jesus consummate their marriage.
Wow.
And have, for not to be gratuitous, but to illustrate they're having a family.
Yeah.
Like he's fully embracing his
Flesh.
humanity and his flesh and becoming a dad. And we see him get old and he's lying on his deathbed. And there are two really important things that to round out this discussion about this movie. Number one, I think it's Peter, and it's been probably about a year since I've seen this film. I'm pretty sure it's Peter. It's one of the disciples. Comes in and sees him growing old on his deathbed. And he says, do you remember me? I'm Jesus. He's like, no, you're not. Jesus died and was resurrected. We're part of this movement now, the Jesus movement. And Willem Dafoe's Jesus goes, no, that's bullshit. I'm that guy and I didn't die. Here's the proof. And he says in response, doesn't matter what the truth is. No longer matters. What matters is that I believe in this story and the movement has begun.
Whoa!
Which is so
Goosebumpable.
there's so much in there in terms of like things you can tease out of that and think about, but like that's certainly to bring in a piece of current media. I don't know if you've seen Dune Part 2 that just came out. Part 2 of the Dune series.
Yeah.
It's the Part 1 and 2 are adapting the first Dune book. That's the whole philosophical argument behind, or one of the philosophical backbones of Dune is around Messiah figures, and Paul, the main character, who's kind of, I guess, the Jesus insert in that book and movie, wrestling with the idea that it doesn't actually matter anymore whether or not he is the prophesied savior. The fact is that the movement has already begun. Whether or not he's
It's fantastic,
on board
really.
with that or not.
Yeah.
It's so complex and so interesting, and I find that really challenging because as a Christian you go, no, I believe in the resurrection, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple of weeks, about the importance of the resurrection. But all of a sudden Jesus is confronted with this idea that like it's happening whether or not he wants to go through with it or not. And so then as well, he is confronted by the person who was tempting him on the cross, which turns out to be, it's implied, was Satan, taunting him like, tricked you, unlucky. And Jesus suddenly has this revelation of, you know, I am the Christ, I have to die, as is the plan, as is prophecy, as was the whole point of me coming to earth as a man. And so it cuts back to Jesus on the cross and he dies. And the story plays out as is the gospel retelling. So
at the end, can I ask you, how does it leave you feeling when you see that? Is it relief? Is it confusion?
I love this, and I've thought about this a lot, because a lot of people think that in emphasizing his humanity and in depicting what is the last temptation is the temptation not to embrace his divinity, but to cast that aside for the sake of just being a man. I actually think that makes his sacrifice even more incredible, because that there's so much more weight to Jesus' decision to go through with it and not fight back and not save himself, because he could. We know that he could.
Yeah.
And here we see what would have happened, what might have happened if he had done that. Despite, almost because of his humanity, that is in conflict with, or not conflict, in this weird paradoxical dance with his divinity. That's what makes his death and resurrection meaningful. The fact that he did become a man. Yeah, I don't know. How does it make you feel? Because it's very confronting to see Jesus. To put it bluntly, we see Jesus having sex. Like that, for a lot of people, immediately.
Yeah, I couldn't have done that bit.
Yeah, and again, it's fictional,
and
but
you know
still.
my story, and even still, it just pushes me one bit too far.
Yeah.
I think. He would have made a great dad, an incredible husband. He's like be the best husband in the world, I reckon. I feel sad that he didn't get to be a husband, but he gets to be. He is more than a husband, and his role.
That's part of his sacrifice.
Yeah.
He sacrifices
I hadn't thought of it like
his
that.
human desire
Yeah.
to have a family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether or not that is truly biblical in the fact that Jesus literally wanted to have a family, the point is that it's depicting this idea that if we take Jesus' humanity seriously, that by default means that he had all of these human desires and dreams and wants that are just part of what it means to be human.
I wonder why God did it that way. Why the Gospels don't go and Jesus had a family and he fell in love with Mary and and they had a couple of kids and lots of dinner parties with the other disciples, and they travelled around and spread the good news, and then he got crucified. I wonder what the point was to have him not live out his man.
Well, I think
way.
That's the point at which the humanity and the divinity clash.
It's like we make him his pure, like Mary was pure to birth him. He maintains this level of purity, and that's like us saying that sex makes us not pure. It's a bit weird. I don't know what I think about all of that.
It's pretty complex.
It is complex.
We might put a pin in that because I certainly don't know what I think.
No. I find that just a bit weird. Yeah.
Write in if you know.
Yeah. if you have an opinion.
Yeah, if you have an, absolutely.
Yeah. Or if you want to come on and talk about that.
I'd
love somebody's opinion on that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Because like at a basic theological level, Jesus was sinless.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if it's not quite as simple.
Being married and does being married and having sex mean you're sinful?
No, I don't think so. But there's implications there about like, well, so then there's a bloodline of Jesus, and that's not that whole dumb, the Da Vinci Code bullshit conspiracy around the Jesus having a bloodline.
Right.
That's where a lot of that comes from as well, which don't get me started on the Da Vinci Code. I hate that book with a passion. It's so badly written.
What an incredible movie this was, Jonty.
I think it's incredible, and it's certainly not without its challenging features. I think like we've talked about, that's by design. But yeah, it's at its heart. It takes seriously a key doctrinal truth that I don't think we talk about much, is the fact that yes, Jesus was God, but Jesus was also human.
Oh, I say it all the time, but I never unpack it.
We love to
His
talk
humanity.
about he was both, but really in practice, we kind of prefer Jesus as
Miracle
being
maker.
the miracle maker, God,
Waymaker.
walking on water,
Yeah,
all of those
we love
things.
that one.
We don't like to think about what it actually means to be equally as human.
Yeah, that's right.
So if nothing else, I think what this film does is certainly for me, it really poked me into thinking about what that means. And for me, what that means is that the remarkable, quite frankly, absurd sacrifice of Christ is worth so much more. I think it deepens and makes the whole core of Christian faith, being the death and resurrection of Christ for our sake, even more meaningful.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. That's right. The death and resurrection, it's the resurrection for me.
Yeah.
The resurrection is everything. That is the critical point that separates all other religions from Christianity, isn't it? Is the resurrection.
Yeah.
That's
And
pivotal.
this is a little detail that I love about this movie as well. At the moment of Jesus' death on the cross, there's this moment where all of this weird light and colour fills the screen. And for a bit of context, this movie was made with zero budget. Like, they were rushing. They were always behind making their day, and they ran out of time. And so this shot of Jesus dying, the final moment of his life on the cross, they were strapped for time. I think they had 2 or 3 shots at it, and this was the third take. The first 2 weren't good enough. They got it. Marty calls cut. One of the camera operators sheepishly puts his hand up and says, the camera broke. That nothing they could do, so they just had to move on. When they looked at the footage later, what had happened is the gate had malfunctioned or broken, and so all of this extra light had filled the frame and ruined, quote unquote, the film. And so that's what's in the movie. And so
how
he talks
interesting.
about it as this, whether or not it literally is a religious intervention, a divine intervention, but at the moment of Jesus' death, it's like the camera itself isn't worthy to be capturing
Jonty.
this moment. Like, it's such a I don't even know how to explain it. And so when you watch it, literally Jesus dies and he looks up and the camera can't take it and all this colour and light fills the screen and it cuts.
Wow.
And so whether or not that's literally
But
God,
you don't know that when you're watching it. You
No,
just
no, no.
think this is the movie and this is the
there must be a
choices that
choice.
they've made.
But that's the only footage they had.
How
And it's this
extraordinary.
fascinating, like some people believe that's divine intervention.
Yeah.
Scorsese probably just, it's a happy accident. The camera broke and that's the best footage we had and it looks kind of cool.
I love a dose of divine intervention.
Yeah. So that's just, it's a really, really cool little detail that I love that I think just makes that moment even more special. So unless you have anything else to add on Last Temptation, I think we've exhausted this discussion. So, I've got a little message here from a listener. So if there's anything that we've talked about today around this topic, and I imagine that's, if you're a human like Ness and I, it's certainly a confronting topic that really shakes loose some thoughts and some, it really, I find it confronting in a good way. It's challenging. If any of that has happened to you and you want to contribute, please do. You can email us at filthyhopepod@gmail.com or you can find us on socials. Interact with us there. There's also a Facebook group that there's a link to down below. If you want to talk to us directly, that's the way to do it. One of our wonderful listeners, James, g'day, how you doing? Different James to the one we heard from in the beginning.
Hi, James.
He says, to change the topic, to wrap up this episode, he listened to an episode that we did last year around Father's Day.
Right.
Around fathers, and I think I slightly facetiously titled that episode, Do All Christians Have Daddy Issues?
Oh, nice.
So he said he's midway through that episode talking about either relating to God as mum or dad. I realised I'd love to hear you reflect on God as mate or God as quote-unquote guidance counsellor, etc. Would be interesting just to hear your thoughts on why we tend to lean towards God in a parental stance and what a space for God outside of that looks like. So
I love that. Thanks for the question, James.
yeah, thanks. Awesome question.
Yeah.
How do you, first of all,
Yeah.
God as mother or father? We're pretty comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, I in my personal life and certainly pulpit life, I'll refer to God Trinitarian, in the Trinitarian concept of Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and then we'll lean into those descriptives. But for myself, I tend to think of God as CEO of my life.
Interesting.
So, James, just a little bit, probably more than a mate, I think of God being the divine spiritual CEO of my life, my path and my direction. That's how I lean in. Yeah. Definitely father doesn't work for me. That doesn't work, nor does mother personally for me. I know it does for many, but for me it just doesn't. Boss, the supreme boss of all things.
I like that.
Yeah. Don't do shit unless you've taken it to the boss first. That's where I go.
Yeah. Management.
Management, yeah.
Yeah. I like that. That's
Yeah.
cool.
I don't know how else to do it.
Yeah. Remember when I was...
What about you?
When I was in high school, I'm the oldest of my siblings, and I had a couple of really key leaders who were older than me. So when I was like, I'm talking like between the ages of 11 and 14, like that kind of age, I had this real connection to a couple of leaders who were probably between 18 and 25, particularly guys, because that's the setting that I found myself in and the sort of mentor and leader that I needed at that time. And I remember thinking about God as like, obviously I understood particularly Father, because a lot of the language in liturgy and in Scripture is around God the Father.
Yeah.
I understood a little bit about God as Mother as well. But I really like, whether or not I understood why or if it was based in anything scriptural or theological, I really lent into this idea of God as being almost like the ideal older brother.
Oh, wow.
Because a parental figure has a certain degree of separation to it.
Yeah.
Whereas an older brother you've got that more intimate
Yeah.
family but friend as well.
And bond.
It's
like James is saying about a mate.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in the older brother image, it's like it's family as well.
Nice.
Yeah, and as the oldest in my siblings, I didn't have that older sibling.
Yeah, of course.
Which I kind of had in some older mentor figures outside of my family.
Isn't it interesting that you've cleaved to a family image and desire for family, yet I've stepped out of family image and into corporate and feel like God is like the boss figure. Yeah, because in my family it was dysfunctional. So I don't want family, mate. Don't want father figure family, but that never lived up to any image of what I had. So interesting that I would pick CEO, Supremo.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. I think more and more as I grow and develop, I love and I always keep reminding myself that any conception or idea of God that we have is just like a fraction.
Yeah.
And I still think I might go back and see if I can find exactly where this was, but I think it was in our episode with Bill Cruz.
Right.
And he said something that I still think about all the time. God, I think it was him. God is the name that we give the blanket that we throw over the mystery to give it shape.
Was Bill.
Was it Bill?
I think so,
I think about that all the time. And so when we think of like God as father, God as mother, God as corporate CEO, God as older brother, God as whatever, all these different figures and identities that we give to the unknowable creator of the universe.
Yeah, that's right.
They're all really helpful in providing ways into relationship.
Yeah.
But as soon as we land on any of them as like a comprehensive description of God, I think you've missed the point.
Yeah.
And you're actually, some would say, you're creating an idol.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which that is a whole other discussion around idolatry. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, James. It was a good question. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
What an episode.
Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm exhausted.
Yeah. So if any of you listening, watching, have any thoughts, questions, queries, comments, you disagree, takes on that movie, because it's certainly a movie that will prompt a take. Like I said, contact us at filthyhopepod@gmail.com or on socials, or via the Facebook group down below if you want to come and hang out with us and a whole bunch of other people that also listen to the show.
Seriously cool.
That just about does us. If you want to continue doing some homework, we're going to be talking about the Passion of the Christ at some point, depending on which order these come out. And also, if you feel like a laugh, chuck on Monty Python's Life of Brian. We're going to have a chat about that one as well. So if you're into homework, that's your homework. Catch up on those films if you haven't already seen them.
Amazing.
Thanks for chatting, Ness. It's been
Thanks.
It's been a really pleasantly challenging conversation.
It was,
I think.
and I just did the Sandra Sully thing.
Oh, you
did you notice that at the end of the news?
Yeah.
How she says, and thanks, and that's us tonight, and then she takes her papers and taps them on the desk. I just did Sandra.
Yeah, look at you. All right, we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
This is a prayer for the people who want to give up, who have been hurt beyond repair and cannot bear to see your face in anything. Find peace in letting go of the guilt that is in yours, and find hope in understanding. Life is not a game you have to win. Forgiveness overwhelming, salvation not deserving. You are loved by something beyond, someone beyond understanding. Drink deep.